So in particular today, I want to talk about one of them. It's called Harborside. It's in Norwalk, Connecticut. And so it's pretty typical type of construction in the Connecticut area for housing units. So it's 5 stories of wood framing for residential on top of a concrete podium. And this job also has a steel portion to it to support a pool structure at the roof level. So it was an interesting job to have like all of these materials coming together and having to think about like wood can move a lot, especially depending on different temperatures. So it was really interesting trying to figure out like how to make sure that the steel and the wood and the concrete would all move together and there wouldn't be any like differential settlement on the job that could be, you know, really problematic in the future if like one of your living rooms is, you know, a step down from your bathroom or something when it should all be flat.
Is the project complete? And if it is completed, what year did it?
Yeah, they're just finishing up the structure right now. So I'd say it was completed 2020. So right now the structure is pretty much done, but now they have to go in and put like all of the architectural finishes on, and then all of like the utilities and, you know, all the bathroom fixtures and everything. So I think it'll probably be another year until they're actually open, but the structure is complete at this point.
What type of college majors or disciplines worked on the project?
So for TT, we were the structural engineers. TT is Thornton Tabasetti. We were the structural engineers on the job. And there was also an architect that worked on it. So we closely work with the architect with a lot of the coordination. And so the architect kind of figures out, you know, where they want everything to be, kind of where all the wall layouts will be and whatnot. And then we start taking a look at what they make and adjusting as necessary for our structure. You know, we might say, you know, we need to put a column here. You have to rearrange your layout for this, or adjusting walls, especially for wood design. These are like stick-built buildings. So it's what you'd think of as like 2x4s and like sheathing that goes on top of them. You might have seen that in Florida. It's probably pretty common down there too. So with that, we end up having a lot of like interior walls that are part of our seismic and wind loading system. So like if there's, you know, a wind pushing on the building, it has to be able to resist that in that direction. So the walls for shear walls are spaced pretty closely together as compared to like a concrete building where you could have like a lot more open space and such. So that coordination is really important, especially in those early stages with the architect. And then there's the MEP engineer. So they work on all of the piping and the HVAC units in the building. So with them, we have to coordinate any penetrations that would go through our podium slab. So we have like one level of concrete, that's the podium, and that supports all of the wood structure above it. So if they need to, you know, have pipes going all the way down through the concrete, we want to make sure that we know where those pipes are and that the concrete can handle it. So those are really the main coordination disciplines. Then there's like landscape architects and other civil engineers that work on like the sidewalk and the grading, but we have less interaction with them.
So who benefits from this project?
It's a housing project, so there will be more housing in the Norwalk, Connecticut area. I think there is a portion of the project that has like economic housing for low-income individuals. So I think based on like the height restrictions that they had for the building, they included a portion of the housing for that.
What would you say is unique about this project?
Yeah. So there were a few things that were pretty unique on this job. One of them I touched on a little bit, which is the 3 materials coming together, the concrete, the wood, and the steel, and just really figuring out how those will move together over the long term. And then there's this amenity area at the roof space. which is in that steel structure area, and it's right on the waterfront. So there were some pretty heavy wind forces that could be hitting this area, and we have these these roof trusses made out of wood that overhang as like a portion of a canopy. So the design of that was pretty complicated, just to get all of the wood load down through the building, but also making sure that it was constructed properly and that everyone was looking at the details really closely and making sure that it would be, installed as we detailed it was important. And so that was actually being erected when COVID hit. So it was difficult for us to go out there and look at it. So they were sending us a lot of photos to make sure that everything was going up right. And so there was a lot of coordination with that. And I'd say that's one of the difficulties with wood structures that makes it a little bit more atypical, is that you have these drawings, but it's the wood framer that really does like a lot of the final detailing and, puts it all together. So I think the construction process is very important to make sure that they're, building what you'd expect to see. With if you compare it to like concrete, you go out and you can see like what the reinforcement layout is and make sure that that matches your details. And then they, pour the concrete and that's it. But with this, there's so many small nails that are going into the wood and so many parts coming together, kind of like a Lego set. So it's really important to make sure that you have a good wood framer and that they're really communicating to you what they're doing and that it's going well.
Would you say that working with wood is your preferred material to design, or?
I think it really depends on what the project is and like what the application is. For this one, I thought it was, a great material. It goes up quickly. It's more sustainable, and it was the right option. But, if we were designing a skyscraper, it might not be the best option. I know that there are some studies out there right now that are trying to kind of push that envelope for like how tall you can go in wood. So it's really exciting to see those jobs, and I think it has a great future, but it really depends on what the job is.
What was your job title at the time of this project?
So this job started probably 3 years ago now. And so I was actually working on it with another coworker of mine. I believe he was a project engineer and I was a senior engineer at the time. So yeah, I was a senior engineer, and actually he relocated from the New York office area. So I ended up taking over the job while it was in construction. So for the past, I'd say about a year, I've been solely working on it for the construction portion.
So you mentioned at the time of this project, how many years of experience did you have?
I guess when I started getting involved, I probably had 2 to 3 years experience. So I started working on this kind of tangentially. I would have some small design tasks, but I wasn't leading the job at that time. But now, since that other person moved from the New York area to Boston, I've been leading the construction portion of it. So that really started more like a year ago. So I guess after like 3.5, 4 years experience.
What would you say is a typical day on the project?
I don't know. There really isn't a typical day, I'd say. Every single day ends up being so different. I think one thing that I didn't really realize when I was in school with structural engineering is that, the project goes through so many phases. Like you'll start a project in schematic design, and that's when, you're working with the architect and you're still trying to figure out like, what is the building? How does it look? How many floors are there? What material are we going to use? And then you get to design development, which is when you start really doing calculations and kind of narrowing in on more of a design. And you start producing drawings for the job. And then you have your construction documents, which you finish your design, everything's as coordinated as it can be. And then they start construction. And construction will take I mean, it really depends on the project size, but sometimes a year, sometimes, many years. One of the embassies that I've been working on, they just started construction and it'll take them, I think, 7 years to construct. So it really varies. And during that construction time, you're involved at different levels depending on what phase of construction they're in. So they'll start by sending you shop drawings to show you exactly what they're going to build. And so you have to review all of those and make sure that it's what you designed and that they're giving you what you expect to see. And then they start building, and there's a lot of different issues that come up. You get these RFIs, requests for information, and that it could, depending on the team, it could be a very large part of the project where, those RFIs and submittals take maybe a year or two, whereas the design portion of it might have only been like 6 months. So every job is really interesting, and it's always different depending on, who's working on it and what the project is. But I always thought of that, like, I didn't really realize that when I was in school, that like construction is such a big portion of the job. So there's a lot of like client interactions and speaking with contractors and all. So it was a nice surprise for me to find, because I enjoy that stuff a lot, in addition to design. But
anything in particular that you liked about the project?
Let's see. It was my first kind of wood job, so that was really interesting to learn a lot, especially when I was working with my coworker at the time. It was a big learning curve for me. I'd never done any wood design before. It's not something that you really focus on at school as much. So, I mean, with concrete and steel, you have quite a bit of like background. So it was really exciting to work on a new material. So that was pretty good for me. And I also really enjoyed working with the client on this job. He would communicate a lot and kind of have different ideas for what he wanted his building to look like. So there were a lot of interactive calls with that too. So yeah, I think that made it a little bit more special for me. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anyone you would like to thank or acknowledge regarding this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think my managers were, I'm glad that they gave me the opportunity to work on the job, not having any experience prior to that. So that was good. And I mean, especially with the task of taking over the job after my other coworker moved to Boston was a pretty big deal. I was probably, 3 years in at that point, and it felt like a really big responsibility at the time. So I was glad that they gave me that opportunity and worked with me to, get to where I needed to be.